Welcome everyone to our On the Mic. Today we have Chelsea Hilliard. I am the programs VP on the board of the National Conference of Women's Bar. Um, and a part of this program was to highlight, anyone that received an award this year from the National Conference of Women's Bar Associations, to sort of replicate or understand, other programs that have been seen as outstanding and or having a great community impact. And Chelsea, she's the immediate past president of Dallas Women Lawyers Association. When she was president, spearheaded this amazing program to create a documentary. And so, with that, just a little bit of background about Chelsea. She's a litigator, trial lawyer down in Dallas, over a decade of courtroom experience, over 100 cases handled, state, federal courts. She really is a team leader and passionate about developing people and promoting diversity throughout her teams, and definitely is an efficiency nerd, as she puts it on her own profile, which I absolutely loved. But Chelsea, without further ado, I'm going to kind of let you take away a little bit of more of an intro about the documentary and how that came to be, and then we'll see a trailer of that here shortly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jesse, for having me and for highlighting the work of the film and DWLA in partnership with the J.L. Turner Association. My co-executive producer, Candace Walter, and I had the genius idea to make a documentary with essentially to cover or to preserve the stories of the trailblazing women who came before us in Dallas, in the Dallas legal profession. The story about how this all came about is a rather long one, but it started probably 2 years before the film premiered. And side note, this particular interview event could not have come at a better time because we premiered the film last year, March 8th, on International Women's Day. Woo!
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great.
Happy belated International Women's Day to everybody in attendance. And in fact, this past weekend on Sunday, on International Women's Day, local Texas General Counsel's Forum and ACC DFW chapter had a showing of the film once again. So it's nice to see the community come together. But going back to your question about where this came from, so a couple of years before it premiered, I was thinking about the amazing organizations that we have in Dallas. I mean, Dallas is being a transplant, I should mention that. I've always been impressed by the sense of community here and the philanthropic efforts. The Dallas legal community is such an active one, and the folks that really are in charge of these organizations, they do so much. And it's not just for the legal community, it's for the broader community, all sorts of interests involved. And I just was always amazed at the work that these organizations do. Organizations like Attorneys Serving the Community, Dallas Women Lawyers Association, of course, J.L. Turner. There's so many, and I'm remiss to even call out a few, but I was always wondering, well, how did this all come about, and how did it get to this point where it was just so impactful? And I remember I had attended a series of events, and you'll hear origin stories, but it's always through the lens of one organization or one person. And I just had the benefit one week of attending a series of events that were sort of fireside chats, if you will, where women, and I remember specifically Liz Lang Myers, she spoke at the first night was at the Mac Taylor Inn of Court, and she was kind of talking about her rise to, where she got all of her accomplishments and what it was like to be a woman, practicing law in the late 60s and early 70s. And then the next day was a fireside chat for the founders of Attorneys Serving the Community, and Liz was there again with and it was hosted at Regina Montoya's house. Anyway, and I just started piecing together. I'm like, these are such incredible origin stories, and there's so many. I started to think there's so many similarities in terms of how they came about and why. Like that was the thing I think that really just was fascinating, the why. And in my estimation, I mean, I always thought it seemed to me that women came together and found each other and created community when they were the onlys. But these organizations really didn't start to, formally be organized until there was a community need. Um, so once I knew I would be president of DWLA, I happened to be sitting with Candace Walter, who at that point knew she was going to be president of JL Turner Association at the SMU Law Distinguished Alumni Awards dinner. And I told her, I said, look, I've got this idea. We have so many great organizations, but we tend to cannibalize each other. When there's for Women's History Month and things like that. Wouldn't it be great if we came together and did this collective, like a series of events where we could bring more attention, more eyeballs, more young people to really understand and hear the collective narrative so they could understand the context, understand, the broader picture, that texture, if you will, that I think really makes the stories so incredible. And she, not only did she agree, then she followed that up with these famous words. Thanks, Candace, which I keep saying. She said, yes, let's do this. Um, but it needs to be a documentary. And neither one of us had ever thought about doing a documentary or have any experience. I've never made a film except on my iPhone, and I don't know that we can really call that a film when I'm, taking a video of my cat doing something adorable. Anywho, so long story short, that started our journey, and that was like I think in like January of the year before it was essentially 1 year prior to our start, the start of our presidency. And so yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, that's a great, great story. And I think it's so important to really have that thought of, where have we been to then kind of know where are we going or where should we go and sort of learn some of those lessons, right, from the past. And I love that you're like foundationally, where did all of this begin, right? Right as you're stepping into your role to lead all of these women and to take in like one of those roles that's so important in the history of this bar organization. Where have we been? What has already been done? What did these other women face? Right. And it's really good insight and something that I think a lot of our bar leaders could really think about and look towards, right, in terms of what their position is. We have a
Yeah,
question.
I, the one thing, I mean, I was thinking about like advice, because there's so many great resources out there where people have highlighted or documented or, captured the stories of an individual.
Mhm.
Um, and the sort of unifier that really, I think, got me started thinking about the timeline here was the saying, we are powerful when we empower one another. Like that's something that's like on my wall. I have that front and center. And I just kept hearing that in all of these events where I would go and listen to, people talk about the start of the organization.
Mhm.
And so I feel like it was helpful to understand not only the individual stories, but there were these truisms that just naturally came out of it. Um, and I think that there's an element of hearing the collective that helps you understand like the true power of your community.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. We were going to show the trailer,
Great.
and Yvonne asked, "Where can you watch the documentary? Is it on the Dallas Women Lawyers Association website?"
But here's the fun but not satisfying answer
Okay.
currently. Candace and I apologize. I mean, this is not unfortunately my job, full-time job at this point, but we we got the premiere out. We've done a lot of showings. We are sort of limited in terms of our knowledge about distribution of a film. So
Mhm.
if anybody out there has ideas or has resources, please contact us. We're raising our hands going, hey, we've like kind of reached the limit of our knowledge here. Help us get this out there. Um, so I mean it's on the list for 2026, but as
Mhm.
it is right this second, um, I don't know what that looks like, and we're very open to, you know, accepting help.
Okay, well, that's great. So before we get into the process and everything, Jill, can we show the trailer?
Every woman attorney in Dallas stands on the shoulders of Louise Washington, Sarah Hughes, Adelpha Kane. The women that have made a difference in our community have been women attorneys making that difference. I was put there to open some doors, and the doors that I have been able to force open, it is my sincere hope that they never be closed again. We can slip back into our old ways, so we have to work very hard to make sure we're doing the right thing. I know how important it is to represent your community at the leadership roundtable, and that's what leads. That's what Adelpha instilled in me. Every female attorney has that potential within them. You have an obligation to your community to contribute to it, and that's what the profession needs. We should really underscore how important women attorneys have been to making Dallas the city that it is right now. So many of these women who have been just extraordinary leaders.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, that's great. So now we kind of want to talk more about the process because, this is such a unique undertaking. Obviously, like you said, it's not like you were just, creating documentaries on your spare time. But I do think that this is a project and a history building, legacy building component that many other of our bar leaders in their states could take on and should because
Absolutely. And now, like,
documenting,
do
yeah,
it now.
yeah,
Do it as soon as possible.
yeah,
Sorry.
documenting this history is so important and for the legacy building for all of the reasons that you talked about before, but to give people some tools and to understand this process, I'd like to hear from you, what kind of was your process and from research to creation and all the people that you pulled into your network.
Absolutely. And I'm smiling because I'm so excited because this, when you were like, we want to share the process, we want others to enable others to do this. That's what this is all about. Um, so I have a couple things that I can share my screen, not as like I guess what I want to start off by saying is I went, I, when I started thinking about this idea, this project, before I even pitched it to Candace, I had done some research and started plotting some things out on a timeline. And it turned out that there was a lot of synchronicity and overlap, and I was sort of like blown away. And so it was helpful to have a general idea of kind of you know, where things were on a timeline just as a starting point. But then that next step was, okay, well, what does this process look like? And I think this was like before ChatGPT too, because I don't remember being able to like type in something into the ether and it spit out like, hey, this is the process and this is what you do.
Right,
That would
right.
be great. And you
Yeah.
guys should probably do that. I'm happy to share my screen and show, like I literally just I pulled up my OneNote. I love OneNote because I'm an organization nerd. Um, and I just was like, okay, and Candace and I were talking about like we need to have like a clear vision and parameters and like, we especially because at that point we were like, we'll bring other people on to help us. In the end, it kind of was us. Um, it was a lot, but it was helpful to have both like an overview, which I call it an overview. I don't know, there's no like technical term, but I was like, what's the subject, the purpose, the angle, format? Like we created a log line, which did get evolved, it evolved over time. And then what I called a creative anchor, because I was like, if we're doing all this, we need to have like some sense of what are we tethering this to? Um, and then, so I can share that. That's sort of like the first thing. Let's see, share. Okay, so I'm sure y'all can see my screen now. So really, I was like, there was this quote that I had read about from Louise Raggio, one of our um, founding trailblazers, the Mirepoix, as I call it. Louise Raggio, Judge Sarah T. Hughes, and Adelpha Callejo. And she was just talking about, in her experience, like there were so few of them, and when they celebrated each woman's victory, that it was a breakthrough, any breakthrough of any kind was an occasion for joy. And so these were things that just like kind of inspired, like why are we doing this? And so then, came up with an angle, format, log line, synopsis, style, and then release timing, famous last words. I was like, it has to be, we talked about Women's History Month, so we knew it would be March. And then later I got more specific and I was like, it has to be March 8th. So glad I was so adamant about that. Although I do think it's helpful to have a deadline. I will circle back to that. Because had we not had a deadline, this project probably would still be in the works. So we ended up almost start to finish once we were like really, really involved in the, research and interview and filming process. It was, and then post-production was like 9 months. So I don't recommend anybody trying to do that or replicate that. That was insanity, but it can be done in 9 months. So then I was going to show the creative anchor. This is just basically the same thing as before, but then, so I just started researching on Google, and Candace was doing the same. And we identified what we thought were the phases of, and let me see if I can make this bigger. Oh, there we go. Of like a project plan. This is all very lawyerly, right? I'm like, let's create a project plan for a documentary. So phase one, pre-production, research, right? Like identify the key moments, the women who were first, all these things. And then, phase two, let's conduct informal, I was calling them virtual summits, because Candace and I were like, we need to, not like a depot, like we want to have these like casual conversations where we're ferreting out like the full story and understanding what we're missing, right? Because there were so many, even when we would research, we'd only get part of the story, or there would be gaps in terms of what information was provided. And so we thought this was not only helpful, and it ended up being incredibly helpful, but we originally thought, okay, we can do this in a group, right? Like with multiple women. It ended up being one-on-one. And so we ended up having a pre-interview and then the interview.
And when you say pre-interview, is that like you're not filming or anything,
correct.
but it could be a phone call, it could be a Zoom, it could be in person.
Yeah, they ended up almost all being via Zoom. And we really wanted to be face to face. And they weren't depot-like at all, but it was almost like you were doing a fact depot with a friendly witness.
Mm-hmm.
You're finding the doors to kick open and then exploring those rooms. So there's a lot. I was thinking about this before today's call. There are so many skills that we have as lawyers that translate fabulously into making a documentary. We are good researchers, we are good interviewers, like all the things. So, but the key thing about these pre-interviews, like we had all of these questions, and I'll show you the timeline, but there were so many, like one of the questions we asked every woman during the pre-interview was, have we missed anyone? who else should we talk to? You know, who were the key influencers, or who were the women that came before you? And I'll show you in the timeline. And then we were just slotting that in as we were going, and then fact checking and all of that. But that was one of the best resources we had, and that led us to so many additional interviewees, but then also it helped us connect the dots between the different stories. So, and
And
then
were the people receptive or excited about the interview and being involved? Did you have some resistance at all?
it started off slow. Um, and to any of the interviewees who may listen to this, I say this, I say this in love, like out of love. I don't, a lot of people, we heard a lot, the word actually, or what you're trying to do. We heard a lot of women were saying, we think it's great what you're trying to do. Kept hearing, it's actually a good idea, or, these sort of, I don't think people really thought we would do it, that we would complete it. Um, and so I think that the process, and I get it, like it's a lot to take on, and I certainly underestimated the, amount of time, energy, and life that it took. But it's also like one of the things I am most proud of in my life and career. So I challenge folks, take on the big scary thing, because if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you. So then, I mean, I just kind of quickly, we had listed out, then production, which is when you're actually filming the interview, shooting them, and then post-production, which is editing and that sort of thing. And I can stop sharing this.
And
I will
when did
say,
you have the filmmaker come into the process? Was that before you filmed your interviews?
yes. And so once we had really done a decent outline of the timeline, and the timeline was so key, because that told us, and we fact checked. I was like, it's like writing an appellate brief, like 150-page appellate brief. Like it had, actually, if you watch the film at the end, it's like the credits, it's just citations, like all of the sites, like all the facts, the receipts. Well, we knew we would need a director or filmmaker or some, and so once we had a sense of the story, we knew it was really that the story was there, right? That it was compelling. Then I reached out to a friend of mine, who I knew from undergrad, who is a filmmaker in Los Angeles, in Hollywood. I was like, "Hey, buddy, hi, how's it going, Dan?" So we're gonna make a film. And he was like, "Okay, well, a documentary is a very specific type of film, and there's people that only do documentaries." And I knew that because we went to undergrad at SMU in Dallas, I knew he probably would know someone. So he connected us with Alex, who is a documentary specific filmmaker, and connected us, and we chatted with him and came up with a budget. Um, and because Candace and I, not only at that point, but we basically had done so much of the research at that point already, and then we're going to continue to do it. He was able to, because it was so collaborative on the research writing front. He gave us a discount, and that was great. And we were able to, say, okay, between our two organizations and some of the other organizations represented in the film, we think we can, raise the funds to cover the cost for really the editing, post-production, the filming. And so, yeah, at that point, we were like, okay, great. And we started contacting these women. And there was like, it was a momentum thing, right? Once we had a couple women and they were like, no, that this is well researched, they have a vision, right? They have a plan. Then the back channels clearly started working, and people were like, yes, I've heard about your project.
That's great.
So that was great.
And So the filmmaker, question for you. Do you have any sense of, is this documentary filmmaker that was willing to work with you and obviously did the fundraising to support it, but do you know if they would be amenable to you sharing their information with the other organizations here?
I'm sure I would want to confirm, but
Yeah.
um I'm sure he would say yes.
Yeah. So it might be something that we just sort of put out there that if someone was interested, maybe they could reach out to you personally,
Mhm.
to see if there is availability on their behalf to work with them to create a film for their organization. That would be great.
Absolutely. Um, yep. No, I've just made a note to myself. So,
Okay, that's great. And so then the tools that you needed, you talked about the timeline. And is that something that you wanted to share with
oh yeah,
us? Can you show
I
us
can,
the-
oops, let me switch back here. Okay, so now switching over to the timeline. So, I mean, it really didn't start terribly early, unfortunately, in Dallas, but 1952, J.L. Turner, because we as a starting point, we knew we wanted to tell the origin stories of our respective organizations. And as a way to delineate, because they're like not a cutoff, but I guess it is a cutoff of, who we would interview. We ended up using the year that they graduated from law school. And so that was also another way to tether in terms of, you know, keeping track of where things slotted in on the timeline. So 1952, Louise Raggio graduated from SMU Law. And then, this next column had some like really high level like notes or key call outs. First female prosecutor in Dallas, helped pioneer the Texas Family Code. I mean, there's a lot there, but just to tether in terms of who that individual was in terms of the line item that is about their when they graduated from law school. So then this far right column, um, if the individual is someone we could interview, we would have just put Louise Raggio and had a checkbox, right? Unfortunately, Louise, I believe, passed in 2011 or 2014. And so then based off of pre-interviews and, research or general knowledge, we identified over here women we could interview about this individual. And then the reason there's two colors is I ended up using it as a check system during the interviews because sometimes we would talk about them in a pre-interview and it wouldn't, they'd say, oh, well, I don't really feel comfortable being the person that speaks about that person. I didn't know her as well as so-and-so. And so I would put that in one color. Yellow is basically we had confirmed that they wanted to speak or be interviewed about that individual or had a specific story. And then I was putting checks in the checkbox during the interviews, after the filming of the interviews, to make sure that we, had checked that box, if that makes sense. I'm all about like, gotta have a system. But it just, then you would have like this one, 1950s to 60s, no presence in DBA leadership. We had a really specific quote from Louise Raggio's 1998 letter to the DWLA presidents, where she's talking about how there really were I mean, we don't have anyone to interview per se about, I mean, we can't interview Louise, right? But she had this really specific point. And so we interviewed Harriet Myers, who was the first woman, a female to be a president of the Dallas Bar Association, as well as the State Bar of Texas or the Texas State Bar. because, Louise is quoting Harriet here, and also she was able to give us more context and her perspective on her observation about leadership in the 50s and 60s. So there's things in here that are more general for a time frame, but we were always trying to tether it with something specific, some sort of evidence or something from history, or a story. Of course, the Texas Marital Property Act was a really important thing, an accomplishment of Louise's. And we wanted to get the full perspective of how that happened, like the support she had, because the timing of it, so many of the big accomplishments, not just the first, right? Because the first were big, but what the women were accomplishing for other women was just so impressive. And there was this pattern of women coming together and then accomplishing these incredible things. And so we wanted to understand that and explore the impact or potential impact of community, finding support and empowering each other, and what role that played or potentially played in these really landmark, monumental, if you will, things that impacted all of us. So that was really important, and that's why we called out these portions as well. I mean, there's a lot of things in here that are just sort of my notes, and like I would research this or that and I call it out in a different color, and other people who were identified and things like that. And I probably shouldn't go into all of these notes, but the timeline became a really important tether, and it got very, very, very lengthy and involved. And then I guess I can show over here. So then I don't know if you can see on my screen, for each of the interviewees, they had their own page. Oh, I shouldn't show that one because it has their contact information.
How many people did you end up interviewing, would you say?
19, I believe.
Okay.
And we researched probably 40 or so. Another lawyer skill, sleuthing. We tracked women down. I will pause there because you should not stalk people. We were not stalking people. We did it in a respectful way, but we were like, okay, well, they go to this church and we know this other person who knows us, who knows our character, who can speak to them. We'll ask them to speak with this woman to see if she's interested or would be willing to talk with us. And so there were a lot of women also that we talked with, but did not formally interview. Not everyone was willing to be interviewed, and that was completely fine, but it helped us understand, fact check, connect dots, ferret out, particularly with DWLA, with the Dallas Association of Black Women Lawyers. I was appalled, and I know Candace was as well. Candace was not surprised. I was surprised and appalled that the history was not out there. And there was actually conflicting and incorrect information out there. And so that for me was one of those areas where I'm like, we really need to do a good job of digging into this, getting archives, getting materials from women, even if they don't want to be interviewed, seeing if they'll share the factual information with us so that we can, basically compile the accurate, correct, origin story. And that's one of the things that we hope to do at some future stage, whenever we figure out how to, make the film more publicly available, is to have a website. And we've started a page on the DWLA website, but so that history, at least in a timeline sense, is readily accessible and available. That makes sense. I'm doing that thing where I say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course it
Yeah.
does, because that's what you're trying to get across is all of this information that you found so fascinating, right? Even sitting here and I'm not in Texas, but I still find so much of the information, even on this timeline that you've presented, as fascinating, right? The woman Hughes that, gave the oath to
Judge Sarah T.
vice
Hughes,
president.
yeah.
Yeah, right after Kennedy was assassinated. And then, the note that you just said about the legislation, right, being passed there. It would be fascinating to know when states and what states did what when, right? And what does that look like on a broader fabric for our country, right? Generally speaking, what does Colorado look like compared to Texas, and when some of those changes were made? But the work, the heavy lifting of doing all of this research and investigation, right? The fruits of those efforts and having that available to everyone, whether or not they have time to sit and watch the film, I think is admirable.
Think we're working on it. I mean, there's so much research. I mean, people were like, well, why did you interview Jasmine Crockett? Because she is the only one that graduated from law school after our cutoff date. Because we had to, like, Candace and I have essentially done the research for the sequel. We don't have the capacity or time. And we keep saying, like, next young gun, reach out to us. We are more than happy to give you the template and all of the research and make the sequel, because the sequel is compelling and needs to be told as well. But circling back to Jasmine, folks were like, well, why did you interview her if you did the cutoff? And it was through this research process, right? It was understanding the importance of Sarah T. Hughes. And the one thing, this is my favorite saying now. I mean, Judge Sarah T. Hughes, her whole thing was passing the torch. That you create opportunities for women, but you don't just create opportunities. You reach back and you pull them up. You pass that torch and you show others how to do it. And it was so ingrained in anyone that encountered her, because basically it was like a pyramid. There was just Judge Sarah T. Hughes. That was it. She was the only one, only female. And then after her, there was, Adelpha Callejo, Luis Raggio, there were a few, but she ingrained in them this passing of the torch. And then they ingrained that passing of the torch to the generation after them. And, so we're doing this research and understanding, the story of Eddie Bernice Johnson, who was not a lawyer, but should have been a lawyer. Fascinating story for another time, but everybody should look her up. She would have been a lawyer, but couldn't go to law school. Set that aside for now because I would get upset. And she was instrumental in, she was a first in so many ways, but in the Texas legislature. And the story of the redistricting is featured prominently in the film because it's an important one and is part of the ongoing story. But Eddie Bernice Johnson basically identified and pulled up Jasmine to be her successor when she retired. And Eddie Bernice Johnson passed on this passing of the torch to Jasmine, and Jasmine's story in the film, when she talks about that, it's so impactful because you understand, okay, you're not only your words, but how teaching someone how to mentor and pull someone up has such a ripple effect and such an important ripple effect. And that's why we just felt that this story, this full circle story, was so compelling it needed to be shared. So I was also going to show y'all the interview template. This is just like a general version, but kind of like you would for fact witnesses in a depo, would walk through the format. We had the same format for everyone, almost the same room for everyone at the Arts District Mansion where the Dallas Bar Association is based. And we had some of the same, most of the same questions that we would ask everyone. And then we would also drill into the individual timeline that we created for those. So like for each interviewee, um, we had a full timeline for them. And so then we would use that timeline in our pre-interview meetings with them to fact check, make sure we had the dates right, make sure we weren't missing, fill in the gaps. A lot of times identify additional folks. So we would ask them those general questions in the context of the timeline, but it was helpful because it gave us a grounding. It was really a way to tether and ensure that we weren't, that the stories were coming through in a consistent way without it being us telling, sort of leading the witness, if you will.
Yeah, that's great.
Again, being a lawyer,
Right.
very helpful for documentaries.
Who knew? I would love to know, what the reaction has been in your community and, with Dallas women lawyers, and how has it been received, even from the women that you interviewed?
That's probably the thing that I don't want to say it surprised me, but I don't think I ever thought about it until after. I never really thought. I was like, this needs to be done well because these are heroes, right? These are women who I admire so much. I'm in constant awe of, and these stories are so important that they need to be shared and they need to be. I was like, I've never done this before, but I need to make sure that it's done at least of a caliber that is worthy of them. And there were a lot of comments afterwards about, hey, this is actually pretty good, which I love so much. I'm like, I will take it. And the folks that said, I appreciate what you're trying to do, now say, I appreciate what you've done, like what you and Candace have done. And there were several women who it really, really, I think was incredibly impactful for, because I think it shared they felt like their stories were seen and heard, and that their plight was out there in a way. Um, I was trying to think if there was like one specific comment there. It's been very positively received, both in our community and with the women that were interviewed. To my knowledge, at least everybody has been very, very polite and nice and appreciative.
Right.
The fact that more people, want to see it or want to see it again, like we just had our showing on Sunday, and several, at least 4 or 5 people that were there, it was their second time seeing it. And I'm like, that's great. I loved hearing, this was another comment. There were several people who were there for the second time who were like, I'm always learning something. I love that I learned something new about someone that has been a longtime hero, or someone I've admired for, all of my career. And the nerd in me is like, I'm so happy. Yay.
That's great.
So hopefully it sparks curiosity, and for the younger folks, my hope was always that it inspires them to do the scary thing. And also another thing, actually circling back, a lot of folks initially had a similar comment similar to my reaction when I was researching. I didn't realize it hasn't been that long, like
Yeah.
60s, since like the 60s, really. And I mean, it's kind of impressive when you think, not kind of, it is impressive when you think about what a small group of women were able to accomplish, and then how that has just exponentially grown into additional opportunities. And it makes you want to be like, okay, well, let's continue. Let's make sure that we are carrying on Judge Sarah T. Hughes's legacy and passing that torch.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question is for you, what's been that personal impact? Because you were, in those interviews in the room, spending so much time learning about the history. So I'm interested in, what that did for you personally.
And there's so, I mean, this is why I think, now I'm like, I really want to, Candace and I have a shared appreciation and drive to have this website with more of the background context stories. Um, because there's so much that we could not get in there, like so much. And I mean, I want to say it's because I'm a nerd, but everyone I've talked to has learned something or has just been has felt inspired in one way or another by these individual or collective stories. And I think knowing how someone does what seems unachievable or
Yeah.
so hard is a big part of it. And for me, what I got out of this was it confirmed the theory in my gut all along, which was that empowered women empower each other, and that, a community of women that want to improve either the profession or the broader community are unstoppable and will achieve great things on their own, of course. But um, yeah, for me, it was sort of two things. It was one, I feel honored to have been able to help preserve and share, like, to ensure that folks have, or so that more people know who these people are, know their names, know what they did, and why what they did and how they did it matters. But
Really illuminates their legacy. Mhm.
absolutely. But then the other thing for me is I want young people to be a little, to come away going, yeah, I can do the unimaginable, and I should, you know, get involved, or I should reach out to my fellow women lawyers, and we can do things. We can do the big scary things together.
Yeah, that shared human experience that all of us in this community, right, as women attorneys, that I think is really neat to see and to have in front of your face to really resonate with, right? You mentioned that these women felt seen that you were interviewing, but I would venture to guess that the impact you're having on the community is also all of these women, such as ourselves, really seeing ourselves in what they're doing. We're just in a different time. The needle has moved, but there's still so much work to be done. And so you see, okay, great. Well, that's where they were. This is where they are now. We're facing X, so let's continue to Y, right? And I think that that's so important and it's very impressive. And we tip our hat to you for leading the charge on something like this because it's why it received an award. It's such an undertaking. It's very impressive. And these women, owe you a debt of gratitude. I think Dallas, Texas owes that to you as well for, illuminating this legacy, for creating this, for starting this train. So hopefully others follow suit and reach out to you to do that and to understand these ropes. I, for one, would love a watch party. I'm on board. I'm like, okay, great. When can we do that for the National Conference of Women's Bar? Because I'm very interested. I really want to open it up for others that have questions to ask you because I feel like, someone here might potentially be sitting there with a question. So I'd love to open it up the floor to anybody else. Seeing no questions. Oh, there we go. Kylie, do you have something to say? You just
I
pop.
have a question. I'm trying to think of one. You were very thorough. It's very intriguing. And I agree with Jesse. Like, I'm down for a watch party because I was at Summit and I saw like the clip and stuff, and it was very um, inspiring. Like, it makes you just want to be like, we all got to do this for all the people. And congratulations. It's a great project.
Well, thank you. I, reflecting on it, I don't know, it just felt necessary once we started. It was, and I challenge others to just start digging a little, because I think you'll realize there are stories and, these kind of incredible women in your community that you want to make sure that you get those stories out there and you help shine a light on them, so that, because I truly think if we understand the stories and how far we've come in such a short amount of time, it makes it feel less impossible. If that makes sense. I'm doing that again.
Absolutely does. Yeah. Yeah.
You gotta stop doing that. But if anybody has questions, I mean, it doesn't have to be on this public forum with everyone, but I know Candace and I'm speaking for her right now, but we want to help. We don't have the time and capacity per se to do another one, but we are open books. Like, if there's any resources we can provide, that's why I wanted to share my OneNote. So I'm like, I think it kind of makes it less scary when you understand that it was two lawyers who pulled out their laptops and went to the library and started asking questions. And it's all the stuff we learned how to do in law school in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And templatizing that too, right? Which might be something that we think about, right? Watch party and some sort of template that, if you're willing, that we can kind of strip out some things, but keep some forms. Just getting people started sometimes can really be the biggest.
100%. Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm always like, okay, I need to understand what is the parameters around something.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of work from there. And once you have I like to have, like, to your point, a template. It's very like a prepping for a depot. Like, what does success look like? Okay, I need to answer these questions or
have a timeline, like you said, or a deadline. I mean,
yeah, but
I
being
can totally
curious
agree with that.
more than anything, and I think I have yet to meet a lawyer who is not curious, right? Like, to keep asking the questions and to dig in and, to trust your gut when you're like, this book talks about this, but I feel like there's more to the story, so.
That's great. Well, Yvonne put a note there in the chat. Thank you. It says, I found this website about distributing documentaries. Not sure if it'll be helpful, but click that and keep that tab.
Thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate that. Yeah, we're working on this. I am hopeful that at some point in 2026, we will be able to more broadly share the film.
That's great.
Links. So, but yeah.
Well, we'll circle back and touch base on this watch party. But thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of this with us, Chelsea. Really appreciate it very much. And again, applaud your efforts. This is fantastic.
Well, thank you, Jesse, and thank you to NCWBA for highlighting the work of the documentary and for giving us a platform to share with others. So hopefully it can be replicated and others can do all the good work. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yvonne, jump in.
I just wanted to say I was also I just got curious and started doing research online because I like to do research. And there's also, you could probably try to enter it in another documentary festival because of like an American Film Institute. And then another thing, like you could maybe try to do, like I suggested earlier, is maybe try, if you want to just not to make, like, maybe you could try to put it online for like your website and have people watch it there or different things like that. Or have like the social media for your bar association. But
That's
I thought like
great.
those two documentary things, but you could try to maybe get it enter it in a film festival and get attention that way.
I love it. And this is the power of, women
Community,
who are
right back
curious
to
and
your
want to do
point.
things. Exactly. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jesse.